Who's your mommy?
My mommy?
What, you want some dick?
Man, the early 2000s for movies were something, weren't they? Especially when you were bringing comic book and cartoon characters to life with a live-action adaptation. I mean, you gotta think, pre-MCU, which started in 2008, we got the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, the Bryan Singer almost X-Men trilogy. He did X-Men and X2 before leaving the project before the third movie was even made. And of course, other things like Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas and The Cat in the Hat each got live-action adaptations, which somehow got friggin' Jim Carrey and Mike Myers on those projects. But hey, you know, whatever, they probably look back and regret that, even though I do like The Grinch. I'm not going to sit here and say I don't. I like the live-action adaptation of The Grinch. But there's a reason that after The Cat in the Hat, they stopped doing live-action adaptations of Dr. Seuss movies. I'm just saying.
Shut the fuck up, you cunt!
And I think one of the big main things was, when were they going to turn Scooby-Doo into this live-action adaptation? I mean, for so long we had gotten the original cartoon series of the 60s and 70s, and even some of the spin-off shows in the 80s that featured just Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy-Doo solving the mysteries. And they also had these straight-to-video movies that would come out. Some of the historical ones like Scooby-Doo Cyber Chase, Scooby-Doo and the Hex Girls, Scooby-Doo Zombie Island, which is pretty much one of the, I guess you can say, like, highly touted when it comes to straight-to-video Scooby-Doo movies. Plus, even back then, you had the slew of crossovers. Scooby-Doo meets the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo meets the Addams Family, the Jetsons, Batman and Robin. They were just collabing with anybody that they could. And yeah, it was announced in the early 2000s that a Scooby-Doo live-action adaptation was in the works, with none other than James Gunn writing the script. Yes, that James Gunn. Now obviously, people probably back then heard the name James Gunn and went, I don't know who that is, because at this point in time he was maybe writing things here and there, but he wasn't as big as he was now, to the point where he's actually running the DCU and is working for Warner Brothers, which is a Scooby-Doo property here. And in 2002, the live-action movie Scooby-Doo hit theaters, with Freddie Prinze Jr. casted as Fred Jones, Matthew Lillard casted as Norville Shaggy Rogers, Linda Cardellini, who was Velma Dinkley, and Sarah Michelle Gellar, who was picked to play Daphne Blake. And you look back at those castings and you go, could it have got any more perfect than that, especially back then in the early 2000s? I mean, you may not look at those names now and go, man, they're huge, but back then, those people were huge actors, and it was a big deal to get them on this movie like this. It just was so, like, outrageous that they can get so much star power in here. Plus, Rowan Atkinson is in the first movie too. He plays his character named Mr. Mondavarius, who 2 years after Scooby and the gang, you know, broke up, because, you know, in the beginning of the movie we see them trying to save Daphne from this quote-unquote ghost, and they kind of fail. They still save Daphne or whatever, but it kind of happens by accident, and they're starting to realize that maybe they're not much of a team as they thought they were, but Mondavarius wanted to bring them all back together to solve this mystery that's happening at Spooky Island, because, well, the teenagers that are coming here for, you know, their summer vacation and all that, or spring break, whatever it was, they're arriving fine, they're normal selves, but they're leaving a little weird. And that's leaving Scooby and the gang to go, alright, what the hell's going on? But they're still not on the same page with each other, so they're all kind of trying to outdo each other, but in the end they realize, wait, we need to go back and do what we used to do and figure things out, because that's when we succeeded. And they start to find out these mysteries here. They have this little pyramid thing called the Daemon-ritis that plays a big part in the story. I mean, okay, I didn't know I was watching Indiana Jones, but I'll take it, I guess. And the character arcs in these stories are pretty interesting too. You know, Shaggy's trying to prove that he's not a dumb shit all the time, and of course, you know, Fred is trying to be a better leader than he was. Daphne's trying to prove that she can handle herself. She's not always going to be the damsel in distress, and Velma is just, well, she's still nerdy and all that kind of stuff, so I guess her thing is more being courageous in certain situations, as she still has trouble with other things, but when it comes to brains, she can definitely figure it out. Now, this movie is definitely goofy, and I'm not talking about a goofy movie, I'm just talking about this movie straight up goofy, but I love it. I mean, come on, it's Scooby-Doo. Are you looking for this motion picture masterpiece? Hell no. Why would you go into that movie thinking you're gonna see, like, this, like, epic, just, like, story of this dog, and it just, like, when I mean like that, like, people are making it out like they want it to be, like, the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, you're not supposed to go that deep with Scooby-Doo. They're just playing this off the cartoon and bringing it to life. Granted, this movie has fart jokes.
What? Oh no.
Burp jokes.
Are you challenging me?
Pamela Anderson cameo.
Oh, man, Smithers! The creepy janitor?
Sugar Ray cameo.
Sugar gay, dude?
Yeah, take that one in for a bit. You can definitely tell what time this was made in when Sugar Ray just decides, hey, we're gonna pop up in this movie. And the soundtrack, Jesus Christ, yeah, you can definitely tell how dated this movie is just by listening to the soundtrack. Baha Men, Andre 3000, and Simple Plan. I don't know if I've talked about Simple Plan a whole lot on this channel, but you would know that I don't really like Simple Plan. Maybe back in the day I did because, well, you know, they mainly make songs that kind of cater to preteens, and even now in their 40s they still do that. They haven't grown up. But man, back then, if it was Scooby-Doo related, they were involved, because even though they had a song in this movie and in the sequel that we're going to talk about, there's one thing they did for Scooby-Doo that they are known for, and this became a staple at their live shows for a while because of how popular it was. And that was this. The Scooby-Doo cartoon of my childhood. Don't get me wrong, I loved the old 60s and 70s. I had the whole thing on DVD, all the episodes, all the shows. I had Scooby-Doo meets Batman and Robin. I had it all. But when it came to What's New Scooby-Doo and that theme song, man, if I heard that theme song, I dropped everything I was doing as a kid, whether it was playing with Legos or playing with my Star Wars figures, what have you. And I would go watch me some Scooby-Doo because it's that theme song that just grabs you. This is coming from a non-Simple Plan fan. They went hard on that shit when they didn't have to. And it's probably the best thing, hands down, that they have ever done. But yeah, I mean, I guess you can say that the soundtrack to the Scooby-Doo movie was kind of weird in its own way because you weren't really expecting it. Like, there's this song called Pass the Dutchie when it goes to Scooby and Shaggy 2 years later. They're in the Mystery Machine, they're just kind of doing their own thing. And that kind of insinuates that, yeah, they're kind of hinting that Shaggy is a stoner in this movie. He doesn't smoke weed, he doesn't mention weed. Maybe kind of because, well, the woman that he meets on the plane that he ends up kind of, you know, falling in love with, her name is Mary Jane. Now call my boy Shaggy Peter Parker because he wasn't the only one that was porking Mary Jane back in 2002. Okay, alright, enough with the jokes. I know when they meant Mary Jane, they meant the intentional, oh look, she's named after a slang term for weed, and of course she's the one that Shaggy falls in love with, you know, the stoner. Like, it's insinuated. And to me, that's kind of funny because most kids, that's just going to go right over their head, but the adults are like, I see what you did there. And this movie doesn't just cater towards the kids, and that's what I like. It throws adult jokes in there, like when Velma and Fred are talking, and Velma's like, you only like the popular girls, and Fred just goes,
I'm a man of substance. Dorky chicks like you turn me on too.
Like, most kids aren't going to know what that means, but you're going to get a chuckle out of the adult audience because they're like, hey, you know, that is kind of funny because in all reality, people would say that Velma may just be the hot one of the group over Daphne, just because Daphne's just this pretentious, prissy, rich girl, whereas Velma's just kind of cool, calm, and collected, does her own thing, and she doesn't really care about anything else. And hey, sometimes that can be sexy. Velma being sexy, they couldn't do that. Oh, Oh, you just wait. We'll get there. At the end of this movie, we find out who was behind it all, which, you're led to believe it was this Mondavarius guy, the guy who brought them all together, but we find out that Mondavarius was a robot this whole time, being controlled by none other than Scrappy-Doo himself. Yes, the little rascal that not a lot of people back in the day liked, and James Gunn didn't like him either. I mean, James Gunn wrote Scrappy-Doo the way he did in this movie because he loathed him so much. He just was like, he's gotta be the main villain in this movie. We gotta portray him as the bad guy. And, there were people out there that were like, you can't really do that to Scrappy. He was an integral part of the later Scooby-Doo movies, and to this day, James Gunn does regret that decision, but at the same point in time, he was never a big Scrappy-Doo fan to begin with. So, you kind of had to throw him in there somehow, and of course, if you weren't going to use any of the main monsters in the first movie, then you had to kind of find someone to be the main villain. I mean, am I wrong or what here? And, we also find out that Mondavarius is a real person. It's just Scrappy-Doo had tricked him into... It was something about a rehearsal for some sort of ride or whatever, and Scrappy-Doo just kind of threw him down in this chamber that Shaggy just so happened to be next to while Mondavarius was banging on it, and he lifts it up and goes, oh, look, it's the real Mondavarius, and all this kind of stuff. Like, he was been in there for 2 years, probably starving, hasn't had anything to eat. You mean to tell me that he's still alive? I don't know about that one, but it's a Scooby-Doo movie, so I don't know if you would go that far by saying, oh yeah, look, he's dead, he's a skeleton, he died of starvation, okay, whatever, but, it was just cool to see Mr. Bean in this movie as well. Again, star power. Back in the day, this is who you got. These were like B-list celebrities that you would never thought would have done a movie like this, but they did. Now, the movie didn't really sit well with critics, but that's okay. Again, it's a Scooby-Doo movie. What mattered was it brought in the box office and was immediately signed on for a sequel. Now, most of the time with movies, the sequel isn't usually as good as the first, and it never really tends to capture that magic, but there's always something there for the most part, at least when you talk about the better sequels in a franchise. But with Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed, which came out in 2004, it feels like a completely different movie. And by that I mean, yeah, it's the same cast and it plays off as the sequel to the first movie. It just doesn't feel like it fits the atmosphere of the first, if you get my drift here. The first movie, I think, couldn't have gone any better for what they were planning to do. Without using any of the main monsters, they were able to create these new characters and build this insane plot twist. But in the second movie, I think over-bloating was the problem. Because keep in mind, these movies aren't super long. They're about an hour and a half. And with the second movie, with it being called Monsters Unleashed, unlike the first movie when they were, not going up against their familiar foes, the people in the costumes who were the so-called monsters, now we get to pretty much see not all of them, but a majority of them on screen, and it just felt too forced to me. Like, this movie couldn't pull in the same magic as the first one. Is it still fun? Yeah, in places, but at the same point in time, I felt like the writing was worse for this movie. Now, people think that this movie is a prequel to the actual first movie, but I don't buy that. Because when you look at this museum they have of the costumes they took from the people that they caught doing this stuff, it seems like they've been doing this for a pretty long time. I mean, they had a lot of costumes and there are a lot of catches. So, I don't think it's a prequel. I'm not into that conspiracy theory. I think it is a direct sequel to the first. However, there's some things that don't really get mentioned from the first movie that I really would have liked to have known about. Like, what happened between Shaggy and Mary Jane? Obviously, they're not a thing. How long has it been since the events that happened at Spooky Island? And oh yeah, what happened to Velma's little love interest in the first movie? Like, they just kind of, interact with each other a couple times, and all of a sudden we're just supposed to insinuate that they like each other, even though by the end of it, Velma was just kind of, broing it up with him. They weren't doing anything, romantic. It was almost kind of, tomboyish in a way. So looking at it now, I think it had to do with the original script. Velma was supposed to be really gay, according to the director and James Gunn, the writer, but her quote-unquote queerness was kind of, taken down a bunch of notches, so it's still insinuating that Velma wasn't fully straight, but yet she still went on a date with this dude, and then also had a crush on Patrick in the second movie. So it's leading me to believe that, was she intentionally made bisexual so that she didn't have to be fully lesbian for this movie? Because you gotta think, back then that was a little bit, not that it wasn't accepted, but it still wasn't like as accepted as it is today. So there was a lot of questions surrounding that. I don't think that was in my head at the time making that video, but now I kind of realize, like, that could have definitely have been it. So that just kind of all gets thrown out the window, and we're just left with, hey look, they're back. They're bigger than ever. They got this big ass fucking headquarters that they didn't have before, and they're like national treasures now. What I really like about the first movie when they get introduced is they all have their fan club. These girls run up to Fred, and he's like, I got ascots for all of ya. Velma's group, of course, is these nerdy chicks that just absolutely adore her. Daphne, she's got these obviously young girls that look up to her, and of course these two dudes that have her tattooed on their chest.
We have you tattooed on our chest! Look!
And of course, Shaggy realizes where his group of fans are by smelling a scent in the air. A scent of smoke. Not cigarette smoke, but that good old ganja we were talking about earlier. Which just further insinuates Shaggy's a dopehead. He knows what he's smelling, and he knows where his group is at all times. I mean, you just kind of love James Gunn for just putting that in there. Again, kids aren't going to understand it, but the adults are going to be like, he is a stoner. He did it, even though he wasn't originally supposed to be a stoner. That's just what we've turned him into, and I think it is funny as hell. I mean, it makes sense. He's hungry all the time. He never seems to be in the right state of mind. It's just like, come on, it was perfect from the beginning. Now, this movie's different because Shaggy and Scooby are trying to, show the rest of the gang and the rest of the people that they're not screw-ups. That they can solve mysteries, they can be smart and whatnot, and the other people in the group just kind of do their thing. They really don't want Shaggy and Scooby to be in the group, but yet they feel forced to because they are part of the group and they don't want to make them feel bad. So in this movie, for the most part, it's Shaggy and Scooby doing their thing, while Fred, Daphne, and Velma are off trying to figure out the case themselves with the other clues that they got, not knowing that they're still all solving the crime together, just separately, and all this kind of stuff. Plus we get introduced to Patrick, who is played by Seth Green.
No, this is Patrick.
Who ends up becoming the new love interest for Velma. However, this one makes more sense because they go more in depth with it. Apparently she was the one that contacted him about making this museum for, the costumes of the people that they call it. He was buying it, he was into it, and she kind of has a little thing for him. She kind of, has a crush on him, and he has a thing for her. It's kind of like a mutual thing. It feels like it works out. They're both nerdy people, and they just both have a ton in common, sort of similar to Shaggy and Mary Jane in the first movie. However, Velma is not the lovey-dovey, passionate type. She just kind of sees herself as being, oh yeah, I'm with this team, I'm too busy for that kind of stuff. Daphne says, honey, come on. I mean, at some point in time, you just gotta feel that passion. You gotta feel the touch of another human being. And of course, leave it to James Gunn, because holy shit, for those people that thought Velma was hot, he made that come true.
Who's your mommy?
My mommy?
I am so confused.
James, of all things, did it have to be tight orange leather? I mean, Jesus Christ, Tim Burton teased us back in the 90s with Selena Kyle, but this was like, holy shit, man. Velma, I've never seen that side of Velma before, and she obviously didn't like that side of herself either. And the whole thing between her and Patrick gets a little complicated because she starts to think that Patrick is behind all this. The costumes were stolen, and there's this machine that is turning them into the actual monsters, and because Patrick had a lot to do with this, she's thinking that Patrick only wants to go out with her to get closer to her to see what she knows. However, we find out in the end that wasn't true, that this whole time Patrick, like the rest of the gang, is trying to figure out who, vandalized his museum, who stole the costumes and all this kind of stuff. He's trying to get to the bottom of it just like they are. He's just doing it separately and on his own terms. And again, this movie is just wacky and all over the place in itself. I mean, the antics Shaggy and Scooby get into aren't as fun as the first movie. Like, if you remember in the first movie, there's that popular scene where their souls or whatever are, mixing up with each other. They're getting in each other's souls, and they're just kind of like,
Hey, I can look at myself naked.
Oh, brother.
He planned this somehow, didn't he?
Hey, good looking.
Hey, I'm me again.
Yippee for you.
Man, why am I wearing a dress?
Everyone remain calm. Velma, the heck's going on?
Until the protoplasm realigns with the appropriate bodies. I'm Fred again.
Oh, Daff, what's wrong with you? Don't you ever eat?
well, this movie kind of tries to replicate a scene like that by having Shaggy and Scooby drink these potions, because for some reason Scooby-Doo thinks that these potions in the science lab is lemonade, and Scooby becomes this monster, and Shaggy grows boobs.
I've got a chick's body!
And we're supposed to, laugh that up, which as a kid, I guess I did, but, yeah, looking at it now, it's like, holy shit, like, you can get away with doing that now, but it just isn't as funny as it once was. And then, of course, when they keep drinking the potions to try to find an antidote, of course, Scooby-Doo turns into, like, Einstein. Plus, there's a Tasmanian Devil cameo, because the guy who did the voice of the Tasmanian Devil in the Looney Tunes cartoons, he also voiced Scooby-Doo in this movie, so they kind of had to throw it in there, like, Scooby's like, look, I turned into the Tasmanian Devil. After that, Scooby drinks his potion that turns him into, like, the smart Einstein, who comes up for, the antidote for whatever the hell is going on, and Shaggy's, like, this big, buff, stupid gym dude now, and he's like, no, I don't want to change back, I want to be buff forever, but they end up figuring it out. They switch back, obviously, and that's how the rest of the group find out that Shaggy and Scooby were there. They were like, whoa, wait a minute, what are you guys doing here? We came here from our clues. What do you mean you had different clues? We stick together as a team, and that's when we start to realize what's going on. We see the monsters, which, are some of, like I said, the most popular monsters from the old cartoon, like Niner 49er, the, little sea guy, the one that, what do you call it? Deep sea diver guy. He was always one of my favorites. And, the big blob monster, it was just, like I said, the characters that we all knew back then that they would catch that ended up being humans, but this time they're actual monsters. And now they gotta find a way to reverse this. The whole town hates them, the whole town of Coolsville, because, well, they failed one time. I mean, obviously this museum, you can see how many times they were successful with their mission, but they fail the one time, and all of a sudden Coolsville's turning their back on them, like they're not gonna figure this shit out. Like, they end up figuring it out. They reverse the curse, and they find out who was behind this. Because yes, even though, like, in the first movie, there was real monsters, it's Scooby-Doo, so you always gotta, unmask somebody. And we find out that, I didn't mention this, Alicia Silverstone's character did it. Yeah, she plays this reporter. She has 3 names. I don't remember what the full name of the reporter was called. But she was the one behind this the whole time, hence why every time she did a news report on the group, she would always take something Fred said out of context.
You're doing that thing again where you take everything I say out of context. You're trying to make it look like I think Coolsville sucks. No! Don't record that!
they cut out the part beforehand and just the I think Coolsville sucks to kind of make it like, oh, Mystery Inc. is turning on them and all that. Like, it's right there in front of your face that she was behind it the whole time, but you don't look at it that way because there was a scene where her and Daphne are talking to each other and the character that she is pops up right there and Daphne's like, wait a minute, is this real? Until we find out, too, that the cameraman who follows this woman around, Ned, was also behind this.
And the real identity of Ned is... Ow. Ned!
Also, this woman doesn't exist. It turns out to be this guy named Jonathan Jacobo under the next mask, which is just a Alicia Silverstone mask. And who is this Jonathan Jacobo guy that I'm just mentioning for the first time now? Well, he was the original pterodactyl ghost in this universe. He, was the one that would go around in his pterodactyl outfit terrorizing the town, and I guess he got upset that Mystery Inc. caught him, and he faked his death, or it seemed like when he was trying to escape jail he fell and survived. They never really say whether he was faking his death or not, or he just got lucky. And when he found out about the museum, he thought, oh, I gotta get in there, I gotta steal the, costumes and make those creatures come to life. That way, I can get what I want and get revenge on Mystery Inc., and kind of frame them to be the bad guys by coming up with this reporter alias here. It all gets jumbled in, and, it does start to make sense toward the end of the movie. And we get a dance scene at the end of the movie as well. You can almost say they were getting jinky with it. I'll see myself out. I think maybe they saw Shrek and were like, yeah, we can do that. Granted, there was already a dance scene when Shaggy and Scooby are going to this bad guy hangout and they're in disguise and whatever, but this was like the end of the movie. They're all celebrating, they're all doing this, dance together, like choreographed and all this, and it just kind of, again, it came off as too cheesy for Scooby-Doo. Like, I don't even know if we needed that in a Scooby-Doo movie. There could have been so much better ways you could have ended the movie. Like, I had no problem with the way the first movie ended. Heck, the first movie had this ending where they're cheering, and then it gets us to, like, this mid-credit scene where Scooby and Shaggy are at Spooky Island, and they're just enjoying this meal. And even that was a more satisfying ending, because you're like, yeah, that's just the goofiness of Scooby and Shaggy. But in this movie, you're like, a dance number. I don't know why you needed a dance number, but okay. And of course she gets serenaded with Simple Plan right after that dance number's over. So it's just like, alright, sure, whatever. I guess my conclusion on these movies were, if anybody ever expected them to be a masterpiece, of course you're gonna fucking hate it. It's Scooby-Goddamn-Doo.
What you mean, Melvin Doo?
It doesn't need to be this cinematic masterpiece art of a movie. It's catering to a younger audience while also trying to cater to the, at the time, older audience that may have grown up or grew up with the younger cartoon back in the 60s and 70s. And I think they did a good job with it. They did a better job than, say, the live-action Garfield movies did, and even something like the live-action Flintstones or the live-action Popeye movies. Those were very underwhelming in itself, but with Scooby-Doo, those movies, even though it gets worse when you get to the second one, you still have a lot of fun with them. Even now, going back and watching them as a 24-year-old, I still found myself laughing at some of the shit that I did back then because, it's just still funny to me. And I found myself laughing at more of the adult jokes because now I understand them more now that I am a full-grown adult and not a 5-6-year-old kid watching these movies and just going, Shaggy fart, I understand more than just that at this point. And it makes those movies more enjoyable. And again, they're not long. They start and get to the point, and they finish and get to the end pretty quickly. Like, you're not sitting there going, oh god, when's this movie gonna end? You're sitting there going, wow, it's over already? I feel like I need to watch more. Like, it didn't feel right that these movies just went by so quick. And the sad part was, there was supposed to be a third movie here. One final movie to complete the trilogy that was supposed to be due out around 2007-ish. Which is weird because, holy shit, that would have followed the same pattern as Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. So, all I have to say is, the Scooby-Doo universe and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man universe are the same goddamn thing. But unlike the first movie, the box office for the second movie didn't do as well. Okay, so scratch that. It was actually just the reception that canceled the third movie, as the second movie did bring in more box office, but it failed to replicate what the first one did, so people just started to write it off at that time. Even though it would have been interesting because they would have changed directors for the third movie. As a matter of fact, the directorial debut for James Gunn was supposed to be Scooby-Doo 3. He was supposed to write the movie and direct it this time, but it just never happened. I think James Gunn said he partially got into writing what the third movie was going to be about, but it never got farther than that before they canceled it and whatever. And to this day, he still talks about how he would love to make an R-rated Scooby-Doo. Why am I saying that? Well, because I don't know about the second movie, but the original movie has an R-rated cut. I don't know if it's a filmed R-rated cut, but there's an R-rated script out there somewhere. This original Scooby-Doo movie was supposed to be for adults only, but I guess Warner Brothers was like, see, we're trying to make a profit here. We want the merch to sell. We want the kids. You know, this was before everybody was turning everything into like this R-rated adventure. Like now you have the Harley Quinn animated series, the upcoming Velma animated series. You have Winnie the Pooh and the Grinch, who are now going to be turned into these slasher flicks and all this kind of stuff. You know, we didn't have that luxury back then of people willing to take risks like that. Like if it was strictly something made for kids, for family, you were going to try to keep it PG and whatever. Maybe throw in some adult jokes here and there, but for the most part, your target audience were kids. So they told James Gunn, let's not do that. Let's make a script that families can go and see this, because kids are going to want to see this movie whether it's R-rated or not. It's Scooby-Doo, for God's sakes. Like, do you really want to make this an adult-only thing when we can really make a profit off of here? The one thing I've realized about these two movies in particular, too, is, my God, the other movies that have come out that are live action haven't had the same pizzazz as these. Like, I saw those two prequel movies where they're in high school and they meet each other and whatever, and I don't know, it just feels like they were going more, not necessarily dark, but more serious with it. Like, there was still that goofiness there, but it's like they were trying to make it something. And the whole point of Scooby-Doo is you're supposed to dumb it down. If you start to make it complicated, that's when you lose your audience. And I think when Cartoon Network did those straight-to-TV live-action movies, it was just kind of like, okay, but it's never going to live up to what the old ones did. I mean, those are just classics in their own way. I mean, you can't do it. I don't know, maybe it was a lack of simple plan, who knows? Like I said, the music in those first two movies really carried it too, but at the same point in time, I just don't think you can catch that lightning in a bottle again, because of the Scooby-Doo movies that have come out since this, not counting the, straight to video ones, there hasn't really been one where I've gone, yes, this is it, this is the best ever. Even that movie they released a couple years ago called Scoob, I just remember going, what is this? Why is there a superhero? What's going on here? Like, it just didn't make sense to me. And I get it, it's a newer audience that you gotta try to pander to, but I mean, just go back to the basics with Scooby-Doo and stop trying to make it so complicated, and then maybe you'll be able to make a movie like the first two, because it was just, they're not masterpieces, but they are cult classics, and ones that I will stand by, and ones that I will probably let my kids watch by the time I decide to have children, which by that time, obviously, those movies will be even more outdated than they already are, but my God, they're just so enjoyable, and the fact that I've been enjoying those movies since I was like 6, up until my age now, which is 24, 18 years, those movies have kept me entertained, and, it was the first time in a while that I watched those movies, going back and, watching them for this video in particular, but I just felt like a kid again. I felt like, man, this is just, for me, aged so well. I'm still having so much fun with it, and yet I shouldn't be. And that's what makes those movies great. And that's why I think you ignore the critics when it comes to that, and just pop it in and enjoy it yourself, because the critics are going to try to look for this cinematic masterpiece and not necessarily understand what Scooby-Doo is all about. But when you as a fan know what Scooby-Doo is about and you see those movies, then you'll realize that it's not perfect, but they did a lot of things right. And again, that's just what makes them awesome to this day, and I really wish we would have got that third directed James Gunn movie, because it would have been interesting to see how he would have kept the character arcs going for most of them, because at this point Daphne was this chick who could fight, you know, she wasn't backing down. Fred was learning to become, you know, a better leader. Velma was more than just, oh, the nerdy chick who, you know, only pays attention to work. She was starting to have a social life. And Shaggy and Scooby weren't the same nincompoops that they were. They proved that they can be heroes, they can solve the mysteries just by being themselves. And again, the way James Gunn just is able to arc his characters so well, it really would have been interesting to see what he would have had in store one more time for Matthew Lillard, Freddie Prinze Jr., Linda Cardellini, and Sarah Michelle Gellar's characters. But we'll never know. That's really all I have to say about this. You guys can tell me in the comments below, what are your thoughts? What do you think of these old Scooby-Doo movies? Again, I'm not asking you to be like, oh, they're a masterpiece or they suck, but overall, when you watch these movies as a kid and even as an adult now, do they still hold up to you? That's it for me. Stay safe out there, and I will catch you guys in the next one.
We got a Mr. Do here? I got a call for a Mr. Do.
Melvin Do?
No, this is Patrick.